It was supposed to be just another quiet morning at the Cabin Coffee Brewing. Dew still on the grass, and my Harley parked exactly where it belonged. But that peace shattered when Karen's teenage son strolled right up to my garage, pointed at my Harley, and said, "Mom says I can have it." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Before I could even process what he'd said, Karen came marching up the driveway, hands on hips, like she owned the place. The kicker? At that exact moment, I was on an important call, briefing the state attorney about an unrelated HOA legal issue that had been escalating for weeks. I motioned for her to wait. Big mistake. Karen doesn't wait. Within minutes, she was yelling, loud enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear, claiming I was threatening her son and accusing me of stealing my own motorcycle. And just like that, the police were on their way. I stood there, stunned, phone still in my hand. State attorney on the other end, hearing every word as sirens echoed closer. I realized this wasn't just another Karen moment, it was a setup. And somehow, she thought she could twist the law to get her way. But what she didn't know was that her timing couldn't have been worse. I wasn't just ready, I was armed with paperwork, witnesses, and a legal ace she never saw coming. And what happened next flipped the entire neighborhood dynamic on its head. Karen had always been a thorn in the side of our quiet lakeside community. Ever since she joined the HOA board, she'd made it her mission to control everything from mailbox heights to what kind of chairs we could have on our decks. But her latest stunt, trying to claim my Harley for her spoiled son, was something else entirely. I'd known she was pushy, but this was personal. The kid, maybe 16 or 17, had this smug look like the world owed him something. Turns out, Karen had been telling people around the neighborhood that my Harley had been abandoned and that she was reallocating for someone who could actually use it. Mind you, the bike was registered, insured, and safely parked inside my garage. The only reason it was out that day was because I'd moved it to make room for some inspection paperwork. I needed to show the attorney, and speaking of that call, turns out the state attorney had already heard of Karen. Not just from me, but from multiple residents. Complaints had been piling up quietly for months, but no one had taken a formal stand until now. My call that morning was the final piece they needed to begin looking into her HOA conduct officially. As the police car pulled up, I noticed Karen wasn't just angry, she looked nervous. Her story kept shifting, and the more she talked, the more the officer's eyebrows raised. But she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The officer stepped out of the cruiser and walked over, giving Karen just enough space to keep talking something she clearly had no problem doing. She waved her arms, pointed at the Harley, then at me, going off about community property and some made-up HOA rule she claimed gave her authority to remove items left unattended for more than 48 hours. The officer, trying to stay polite, asked her for documentation. Of course, she had none. I handed over my registration, my insurance, even a photo from 2 days ago of me sitting on that same bike helmet, gloves, the works. It wasn't just mine legally, it was mine undeniably. Meanwhile, her son stood to the side, arms crossed, clearly embarrassed now. Turns out he'd bragged to a few kids at the nearby lake trail that he was getting a Harley for his birthday. Some had even seen him take photos of it the day before. I later found out from a neighbor that Karen had been plotting this for weeks, trying to pressure others on the HOA or to back her in reclassifying certain lots and assets around the lake as shared community features. My cabin and Harley were just the start, and just when I thought things couldn't get messier, another neighbor showed up, Mr. Elliott, holding a folder. He'd just returned from town hall and had copies of the original HOA charter. What he discovered in those pages didn't just change the conversation. It shook the foundation of Karen's authority completely. Mr. Elliott handed the folder to the officer, who started flipping through it while Karen's face shifted from smug to unsettled. The documents clearly outlined property boundaries, individual rights, and most importantly, no mention of communal ownership over private vehicles or cabins. The original HOA agreement, signed over 2 decades ago, was airtight. But what got everyone's attention was a notarized addendum from 5 years ago. It clarified that only board-approved communal areas could be regulated, and, even then, not without a full resident vote. My property and my Harley were never up for discussion. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to regain control, saying the board had met privately and agreed to new amendments. The officer raised an eyebrow and asked, "Was that filed with the county clerk's office?" She didn't respond. That's when my phone buzzed. It was the state attorney's office. My briefing was scheduled in 5 minutes. I turned to the officer, calmly explained my role with the legal review committee that had been asked to investigate zoning complaints in the area. The irony. Karen's name was on 3 of them. A small crowd was gathering now, neighbors curious about the patrol car and the shouting. Karen's son, clearly wanting to vanish into the earth, had slowly drifted behind their SUV. The tension was thick. Karen was pacing, waving her arms again, but this time less confident. The officer excused himself to his car, likely calling in the updated documents. And I stood there, knowing something bigger was unraveling than just a stolen motorcycle claim. When I thought things were cooling down, the officer returned from his cruiser, this time with a firmer tone and a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harris," he said, glancing toward me, "you mentioned being in contact with the state attorney. There's something you'll want to see." He flipped to the last page and held it out for me. It was an incident report filed just 2 days ago, by Karen herself. In it, she alleged that I had abandoned my Harley on community property, and that her son was simply taking protective custody of it. On behalf of the HOA, that phrasing alone set off every red flag. At that moment, Karen's son looked like he wanted to bolt, but it was too late. Another neighbor, Lisa, from the next cabin, overstepped out with her phone in hand. "You should probably tell them what you did," she said loudly. Everyone turned. "I have the security footage from Tuesday night. You know when you guys rolled the bike off the lot and tried to fit it in the garage? It didn't fit, remember? That's why you left it on the lawn covered with a tarp." Karen went completely still. Her mouth opened, then shut. The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, do you still stand by your written statement that this motorcycle was abandoned?" Her hands trembled slightly. I thought it was—" He cut her off. "Because if you filed a false report, that's an entirely separate legal issue." The mood had shifted againly this time. It wasn't in her favor. The officer motioned for Karen to step aside while he made a call. Meanwhile, her son kept glancing between me, the cop, and the neighbor holding her phone. The pressure was finally catching up to them. Moments later, another patrol car pulled up, this time with a supervisor. After reviewing the footage and matching it with timestamps from my cabin's own security system, the verdict was clear. The Harley had never been abandoned. It had been moved without my consent, plain and simple. That changed everything. Karen's son was pulled aside and quietly cuffed. Karen tried to protest, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But the officer simply said, "You filed a false report and conspired to remove property that wasn't yours. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." Then came the twist I didn't see coming. As the officers were wrapping up, the state attorney's liaison called me back. I stepped away to take the call, expecting to report what had just happened. Instead, he said something I never expected. "We received an anonymous tip about HOA tampering and intimidation up there. Your situation may actually tie into a broader investigation." I turned to look at Karen, who was now pale and silent. As the officers walked her son to the cruiser, whatever scheme she thought she had under control just exploded in her face. What started as a petty power move over a Harley might have just opened the door to something much bigger than a stolen bike. As Karen's son was driven away and she sat quietly on the porch under police watch, the chaos of the day finally began to settle. The state attorney's office followed up with me the next morning, asking for copies of all HOA letters, videos, and witness statements I had collected over the past year. Turns out, this wasn't the first time someone had complained about that same HOA leadership. My encounter, especially during the official briefing, was the tipping point they needed to open a full-scale inquiry. Within a few weeks, the community saw a real change. Several HOA board members resigned quietly, including Karen's husband, who had been serving as treasurer. Rumors spread fast that internal funds were being misused, and while nothing was confirmed publicly, the silence said enough. Karen avoided me from then on. She never apologized, but her entitled attitude disappeared just as quickly as her influence. I got my Harley back, cleaned it up, and decided to ride it out to the overlook near the cabin that weekend. With the sun setting over the lake, I finally felt a sense of peace. What started as a ridiculous demand turned into a wake-up call for both me and the neighborhood.